You're listening to Changing Reality. Changing Reality, where we bend reality all across the world. Only on WQHS Radio. So, hey everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Changing Reality. We're thrilled to have you all here with us. And welcome on, welcome all. If this is your first time watching the show, where have you been? But also a quick intro about who we are and what we do. Changing Reality is a show that features phenomenal people from all walks of life who are, in essence, changing their own reality. So we're streaming live from WQHS Radio, and through the show, you'll be able to hang out with amazing people from all across the world, because we'll be interviewing all kinds of people, from social change makers, industry leaders, top executives, entrepreneurs, business owners, to even artists, musicians, and inspiring individuals globally. And many of them, like our speaker today, who has actually spent some time here on the Penn campus too. And we get to hear their inspiring stories on how they are not only changing the world around them, but also creating waves in the lives of others. And I personally am someone who's super passionate about this show and the stories that we learn from it. Because through these stories, I believe we can take away little bits of wisdom that we can use to change our own reality. And I feel like there are a lot of people out there who do phenomenal things and are making these waves. And I'm very passionate about hearing how they do that so that we can do the same in our own capacities. So personally, to show you how important I feel the world of stories, or the impact of stories can be, I actually founded and run a youth movement called Ascendance in Malaysia, which is where I'm from, that collaborates with not only the Malaysian Ministry of Education, but today 28 over countries to help provide an alternative education platform for any student who wants to change their reality. So we work with students from elementary all the way up to college through various sessions, programs, experiential learning activities, projects that help them discover their passion, learn about themselves, and also go out there and figure out the world around them through hands-on experiences, actually working on stuff that they are passionate about, so that they can come back and begin to even start their own careers while they're still in school. Careers that not only impact themselves, that are not only things that they love, but create meaningful impact for those around them as well, for the communities that they're in. And to date, we've been fortunate to work with over 35,000 students in 970 communities, and have incubated countless number of student-run projects, social enterprises, and careers run by students aged 8 to 25 years old. So the basis of all of that is stories. We run it because of kind people who share their experiences, who come in and share the things that they're going through, the lessons that they've learned, so that Gen Zs, college students, everyone, or like all of us in a way, can build on their experiences and take it to the next level. So if you have any questions about the show, if there's anything that you guys want to learn about, that you guys want to discuss, do drop it in the show chat below, and we'll take a look at it and see what we can do. So, speaking of inspiring people, today's guest is someone absolutely phenomenal. He's an experienced product management and marketing director accustomed to fast moving environments and agile teams. So he does the whole range of the work in a sense, from design. He's been from designing the products, coding prototypes, and today he actually leads a global team, as he's actually the VP of Acquirer Solutions at Visa. He was a bachelor's degree student here at the University of Penn in political science, and also has a PhD in management science at Stanford University. So without further ado, let's welcome Thomas Haymore, our amazing guest for today's session. Welcoming him to our virtual stage. Hello.
Hello.
Hi, Thomas. How are you today? Has it been an all right day so far?
It has been. It's getting a little colder because I live in the mountains, but still nice fall weather. How about you guys out there?
I think everyone's gearing up for the holidays right now, wherever they are. So very, very excited to have you. This is actually going to be one of our last few shows since we're already in November. So thank you so much for making the time. And I really hope you're excited as we are. So from your intro, you're someone who, again, as I said, manages a global team, works at one of the biggest companies out there. And I've got to ask, have you always known what you wanted to do, or are you like the rest of us, confused college students who are looking for a bit of inspiration, especially as the year dwindles down and we start to reflect on the stuff that we've done? So where did you fit into the spectrum when you were in college, or even before that?
It's a great question. No, I had no idea. And made, a lot of random decisions to get here. When I was a teenager, I really wanted to be a writer, and my parents were like, "No, that's not a good job. Got to pick something else." And probably good advice. I'm not that great of a writer, but I was like, I liked reading, so maybe I could just write. In college, when I got to college, it was a while ago now, probably before some of you folks were born, which is sort of intimidating to think about. But the .com boom was coming to an end, and so it was this weird time where, like, obviously computer science and tech was really big, but then the crash happened shortly after, and it was kind of this intermediate time. So no, like I got political science, right? That's a really big difference from working in product and solutions at Visa. But no, I sort of went from one interesting thing to the next until I ended up here. So if you're the same way, you shouldn't feel bad. I feel like there's still times where I get done with work and I'm like, is this a thing? Am I doing something real? Do I like this? So I think it happens to all of us at any age, that insecurity of, am I doing what I'm supposed to be doing?
All right, so we're not doomed, just to
No,
clarify. Like,
no.
okay, all
Or we're
right.
all
There's
doomed together. I don't know.
so like when you were like at Penn, actually, like how do you go about picking like the thing that you were passionate about at that point of time? I mean, it may not have been the final thing, obviously,
Right.
not now in hindsight, but like how do you even pick the first thing to start in? Was it just like finding whatever seemed the most relevant at that point of time, or did you just throw a dice or flip a coin and be like, all right, this one looks good?
Somewhere in between. When I came, there were these freshman seminars that were required, and they might still be. Haven't checked, obviously. And there was one by a political science professor that I don't think I ever met again after that seminar. And he was on constitution making or writing, and it was about it was American political history. And he was an interesting guy. He's as many professors are. He would only let you write on half of a sheet of paper, and he made you use the Garamond font only. There's just lots of very peculiar rules, and I don't think I even got a great grade in the class, but I think it was the first time in my life I'd been, forced into a room with a bunch of other strangers, but young people, and you debate, abstract concepts, and thought it was great. And that's where I went to political science from there. And started out like I think a lot of folks with the poli-sci econ, but turned out I could graduate faster without the econ double major, so I stuck with political science. But yeah, it was definitely something. The freshman seminar, I almost did computer science, like I said earlier, but my family wasn't an engineering family, and when I talked to them about it, it's kind of funny in retrospect. They were like, "That doesn't sound like a great career." And we obviously didn't know what we were talking about. But I did work as a programmer, which is so kind of funny. But yeah, so it was like you hear about in the silly brochures, where you're like, oh, your horizons will be expanded and you'll meet new people and learn new things. And it really was the case in that seminar. It was really interesting and challenging. It was hard, but I liked it.
Okay, that's very, very fascinating. I've got to ask, though, where did you learn like the whole programming and like that aspect of things? Like, because like here you are like at something that's like literally I could not find something more different from like computer science, and like you just had to be like, what's the furthest thing from programming I could find? It's like,
Yeah, like I could have maybe been like a poet or something, right? And I've been a little bit less. Back in the 90s when I was in high school, which again is before it was a long time ago. Web programming was really simple right at the time. Nowadays it's as complex as anything else, and you're talking about multiple systems. But back then it was like you write some HTML and you load it in your web browser, and ta-da, you're a programmer.
I
And
think I'm being a little modest, but continue. All right.
no, I wish I was. There was a guy in my hometown who, he's one of those early web designer guys, and he wanted some part-time help. And so it was like just random helping him build websites. And it was interesting. I didn't learn a ton, but I learned the basics. So when I got to Penn, that was my part-time job, and the irony was I was working at the gym, the Patrick Center, which was a lot better than before the Patrick Center. There was some old gym. So the Patrick was a huge improvement. Happened while I was there. It probably seems really old now, but it was amazing. And so yeah, that used to be the joke is I work at the gym, doing the website in the back office.
Okay, all right, still really cool. And I think like what's even cooler is after leaving Penn, you actually did a law degree at
Yeah.
Stanford. So like that's again a different turn. So like
Yes.
right now already in the story we've got writer, computer science, and then we've got I'm just amazed with the range. So like what
Randomness. Yeah, I told you it's just very random. It was I don't know what started the spark for law school. But political science is a common degree foundation for law school. So I'm sure there were other classmates. There's one in particular I remember who was in poli sci with me, and he applied to law schools as well. But it felt like a fun continuation of what I'd loved about political science, which was a lot of debate and a lot of abstract debate where you really have to like work hard to convince other people of your point of view, and and you have to sort of think about the real world implications. And so law school seemed really exciting, and it seemed better than management consulting, which in retrospect I'm not sure. But at the time, a lot of people I knew were going to management consultant firms, and that seemed really intimidating to me. Law school seemed a lot less intimidating, and I visited some campuses, and maybe it was because I visited Stanford in the winter, and it was like beautiful and sunny, and that sort of had a subliminal effect on me. But it seemed like a very cool and a very different experience, right? Going from East Coast Philadelphia to the farm, as they call it, with its palm trees, and everyone's riding bikes around, and everyone's pretending to be very chill and relaxed and lying about how hard they're working and studying. But yeah, never practiced as a lawyer, but did finish law school.
All right, very cool. And I like how you define something that was like up to par with Penn. You were like, I already did the Ivy League. Like, let me go to Stanford now. I mean, like that's intimidating for the rest of us, but it's okay. And you also went on to do your PhD at Stanford, right? So
Yeah.
again, what was kind of like the thought process behind that?
So when I initially applied to law school, one of the thoughts was wanting to become a professor, and I was sort of torn about it, and wasn't totally convinced. But one of the reasons I chose Stanford is they're very supportive of joint degrees, and so when I went there and talked to the folks, and they had a whole roster of joint degree programs, and so that kind of tipped us in the favor of going to school there. And then, so the first year I was there, I was already preparing to apply for the PhD program, and had about a year overlap between the two programs and classwork and things like that. And so initially really wanted to be a professor. And a lot of it was to bring, a more rigorous analysis to legal studies. A lot of legal academia is very formalistic. And it was really cool. I loved learning about it. I loved the studies, but I don't think I was cut out for the research. I don't have the attention span. Professors talk about working on papers for 5-10 years before they get published. Teaching is awesome. Working with students is awesome, but the publish or perish wasn't really my cup of tea. And so that's why actually before I finished the dissertation, I went to work in startups. So there was a few years, which was a terrible idea. Never do that. So for a few years there, I was doing the startup thing and working on the dissertation, which turned out okay in the end, but at the time was a bit stressful, and my advisor had grave doubts about my ability to finish, which I get.
All right, I'm gonna meander a little bit and ask you. So, how did you actually end up to do like all these many different things at once? You have to like kind of like work at a startup, like get that part of it done, and you're doing kind of like a dual degree. You had finished your dissertation towards the end of it. So like, what's the mental strategy to like be able to cope with all of this, in a sense, like asking for all of those who are struggling with midterms right now? So yeah.
Yeah. It's a good question. I mean, I don't recommend it. Part of it was I had a tendency to follow peers I really respected, and so I didn't know anyone going to Stanford, but when I joined the joint degree program after I'd gotten there, had a good friend who was already in the PhD program, and I always found that like that really helped me. I like to think of myself as this like brave explorer, but I actually always did a lot better when I had, people I knew around me that could be a little bit like a security blanket, but also just like reassuring. It was the same friend when I was finishing my dissertation and I was running some, analyses on the data and messed something up and thought all the data was bad and was ready to throw it out. It's the same friend I called and was like, I give up. It's not going to work. It's the same friend that talked me off the ledge and sort of helped me get back to sanity and finish. So I think that's part of it, because for me, having that personal connection with someone like a peer mentor kind of helped me be like, okay, why am I doing this? Is kind of more mission driven, because I don't know about, folks listening in, but a lot of what was when I got to Penn was just like a good student. That was my identity. I was like, that's what I do. I get good grades and people tell me good job. And I feel like it wasn't until Penn with more challenging classes, people from different backgrounds, where it was like, oh my goodness, like what do I actually want to do with these grades? And of course, occasionally not getting the great grades that I'd gotten in high school. And so the peers helped. And then I think I was always drawn toward the more active parts of it. So there's a lot of teaching and mentoring you do when you're part of a PhD program, either in a lab. I wasn't in the hard sciences, so it was more teaching and mentoring. And I love that. We had we worked with the National Science Foundation on some stuff. We worked with an entrepreneurship center at Stanford. So it was very busy. We used to joke about the 40-hour work week being over by breakfast on Wednesday. But it was great. I mean, you're working with people you admire, you're learning a lot. But then your 20s are over and you get into your 30s and you start, your life is different. You're married, you might have a kid. And so that changes. But, for a lot of my 20s, it really was this working with people I admire, working with friends I really looked up to, and you felt like you were having a cool impact in people's lives. I was working with undergrads and graduate students, and sometimes professors help kind of think through their dreams. And that makes you feel like you're contributing to a community. And it's not just about you excelling. And I don't know, that's kind of a long answer, but that community, being part of a community, I think is what made it real for me and helped me stay committed through the end.
No, lovely answer. And I've always been a big advocate for community. That's why I started the
Yeah.
sentence I mentioned earlier, because it was always about having like genius is something that you can do by yourself, like that you have innately. But I've never been the brightest, like by myself. And I feel like being part of a community and creating that community for others, like reciprocally, has been giving me meaning at the very least, and has helped others kind of like excel, even if they may not have the individual capacity or may not have the resources or experience that they would otherwise need to do so. So definitely agree with your answer. How was this like? It seems like an excellent frame of mind and an excellent experience to be in, where you actually have this community. You transition in a sense from a high schooler or to someone in college who, again, as you mentioned, has this identity of someone who is figuring things out, a good student, all of that. How does that translate when you like transition into the working world? You mentioned you started off working with a bunch of startups and all of that. I know that you worked with Wordnik, which I think is more towards the IT side again. So like how did what was your frame of mind entering the working arena in a sense?
It's another great question. It's a really different going from school, whether it's grad school or up to the working world, is kind of an interesting transition. And I didn't join a part of any, I wasn't part of like a rotational program or an associate or apprenticeship where there's lots of rules and regulations. You have like a class you go in with, and it sort of gives you this nice like landing into a place, which I highly recommend. We have them here at Visa, and it is great. It's great if, you're starting out and you have like this, other group of people starting out with you. But I missed all that. And so when I went to the working world, part of it was great because it was, doing a PhD program or a law degree, there's a lot of competition, and it's often friendly, but it's there. And, you're kind of arguing with really smart people all day long. There's no right answers. Again, if you're in the hard sciences, then this might be different, but I was more in the management science, and so you're just like, you're sort of always ready to go prove your worth. And at work, it was more collaborative. And I really liked that. Like there was a team. It wasn't just you had to be on all the time. You had to be there for your team. But, if you weren't there for a day or something, there was other people that were working and you were all working together on it, which felt really nice. But, it's also hard because criticism is very different. Criticism at a school level is just very different than at work. And, I think if my pride was wounded a lot at that first job, when, I thought that kind of probably went in there with a little bit of like, well, whoever the smartest person in the room is and can prove it should get to make the decisions. And that's not actually the way it turns out businesses are run. And so I think I had my ego dinged several times, but good, in a good way. Like I, once or twice just kind of come home and, be like just steaming mad. And then you calm down and you realize like, you know what, like I can learn from these people. So a lot of checking your pride at the door, which helped, and a lot of listening. I feel like that first job I was really lucky. It was a very small startup, less than 20 people. And I was a product manager. I didn't have much technical work to do. There was a little bit. So a lot of what I got to do was listen and learn from the other people. And some of them, totally different than me, wouldn't do things the same way, but it was still really helpful to learn from those people. But it's a transition, that, I mean, I joke a little bit, but I think I've kind of, adopted too much of this, like, I'm going to show up every day, prove I'm smart. And it's like in the corporate world, that's the wrong motivation. You show up every day, help your team, and, sort of a lot of times you want to be a little bit more invisible. You want to be often the mentor or the friend. And that's changed a lot, I think. So it was a good transition, but it did challenge me in a lot of ways. But in a good way. It did make me question. I think that was a job where I was like, maybe I should have gone the technical route. A lot of folks make this transition. Mine was always, I was always a hobbyist on the technical side, never formally trained. It's always a big choice. It's a big choice to decide I'm going the developer route or engineering route. And a lot of folks get a few years down that road and they realize, actually, I don't want to be, working on PRs and stories and having a bunch of idiots on the business side telling me what to do for the rest of my life. I'm going to go to the business side. And I'm going to tell these people what to do. But I think I sort of confirmed for me there at that job that I preferred being on the business side, and that the guys that were on the technical side already knew like way more than I did. And I was not behind so much as felt a better affinity for the business side. So that first job, the transition was rough, but I do think it helped. And if you're going into technology, it's a choice everyone kind of has to make of, am I going to be on the technical side or the business side? Not that you can't switch, but it's a big choice to make.
No, I think it's an absolutely brilliant sharing. I have been fortunate to be able to work and study at the same time, and I often feel like my student brain doesn't fit into the working world. No, and it's real, and I have to like actively tell myself, you're not getting graded on this, or like nobody's gonna like nobody's like in school it's like you score 1 to 100, like if you miss something out there, like you just go read about it, you figure it out. But in the real world, there's like nobody's like has a mark scheme to like what you're supposed to do or what you're supposed to say. So that's been my challenge switching. And I heard a lot from like Penn students who leave into the working world, and we often think that, oh, we're from Penn, we've got it covered, and then we get hit like as we transition out, and we start to realize that, wow, this whole thing is different than what I imagined. So thank you for sharing. I think that's very, very relevant.
Totally.
And like, I really love that part about kind of like deciding early on, like figuring out early on those like core concepts that you mentioned. It's about collaboration, not competition.
Mhm.
It's about figuring out whether you're more on the technical side or if you're more on kind of like the management side. But what do you think enabled you to figure out all of these things so early on in that first job itself? Like from what I've heard, sometimes it takes a bit of a while for us
Yeah.
to kind of like wrap our heads around it. So what like, was there like a particular incident or something that
Yeah.
happened, or was it something that gradually we just like get hit a couple of times and realize in a sense?
It's probably a combination of both. And I was when I hit that startup, I was in my late 20s already. So I was actually behind some people because I'd been studying for so long. So I had some catching up to do. But a lot of times if you go to grad school, you think of yourself as like really well equipped and I'm an expert. But for folks who went right into the workforce, sometimes they're ahead of you because they've learned all these other lessons of teamwork and building up a little bit of a thick skin to deal with feedback and things like that. In terms of who helped, so um, a lot of it, I found that in internships and various other not volunteer, but other stuff at school, I always asked people about what they did and what they learned. And people, especially, and a lot of these folks, toward the end of their careers, because they're helping or volunteering at a university, or some of these, Stanford startups are really big. And so a lot of these folks are venture capitalists who have, done quite a bit with their careers. And I felt like I hadn't done a lot of interesting things compared to these folks. And so I was always asking them about what they were doing. And I feel like I was able to like vicariously learn a little bit through them. And they would all share these stories about like screw ups earlier in their career. Like one guy who was a mentor of mine, and for a lot of people, I mean, he was an old startup guy, got out of the game before the collapse, so he really lucked out. But he had this great story about when he was marketing director of maybe a graphics card company, can't remember the company. So he and his team spent hundreds of hours building the sales manual, right? Big, thick volume. How do you sell our graphics cards? Printed out thousands of copies, had them delivered over to the sales team in a different building. And he got so excited. He and his team were like, let's go over and just see how much the sales team loves this guy. And so he goes and drives over there. And as they go over there, they're like, do you smell smoke? And they drive over to the other building. Everybody is out in the parking lot, and there's a huge bonfire in the middle where they are burning every copy of the go-to-market, product marketing manual that that he made, and which is an awesome story. And we don't print things out enough anymore to ever have that happen again. But and I had my own version of those, right, where you sort of just screw up. It usually happens when you think you're just doing awesome and you're not listening enough. But I think I heard, and so when people share those stories of when they're like very vulnerable, I feel like they teach you more than when someone's like, here's how awesome I was, here's all the money I made. Those stories are kind of just like, yeah, whatever, you're awesome. But when someone, especially someone who you see as like really successful, shares one of those stories, I feel like it leaves an impact. And I feel like it enables you to tell yourself, oh, I'm going to screw up too. And sort of prepare for that. Like, I'm going to screw up. It's going to be embarrassing, but eventually it'll be a really funny story. And I think that mentally prepared me for my own sort of screw ups in life. And I think those moments really help you ask like, okay, I messed up, and like coming from Penn or these other places, you're not used to that, right? You're sort of usually have this mindset of like, that's not what I do. I don't mess up. I come and I deliver. And being prepared for those moments, or at least knowing in your mind, no, this happens. Successful people have these moments, lets you slow down and say, okay, what can I learn from this? And a lot of times that's, apologizing to the people you hold close. And that's another thing I had to learn, which is, recognizing who the people in your career who are really dedicated to you, and making sure that you kept things right with them. Because at work, you're going to get frustrated sometimes, and sometimes you're stressed out, but when you can kind of keep an eye on like, look, some of us are really investing in each other and making sure you acknowledge that and respond in kind. Yeah, I think really helps. Yeah. So I think for me, I mean, I could tell you all sorts of stories in my own scripts. Nothing is quite as good as a bonfire of sales and marketing material. But I think that helped because for me, I really needed that. I really needed to understand that it was okay to screw up and it was okay to be wrong. And that was just part of the journey of joining the workforce and having a career.
No, absolutely beautifully said. I'm someone who definitely, maybe it's the Penn student in me, struggles with
Yeah,
screwing up, which is ironic because I do screw up a lot. So
yeah,
it's like,
everyone does. Yeah.
yeah, but nobody's like created a bonfire yet. So like,
Yeah.
I guess like if successful people had gotten like that level, I think that I've got a little bit more room to grow. But thank you for sharing that. And over the years, what do you feel like has been like? Maybe you could share with us some of your pivotal stories of things that have taught you lessons in a sense, or like at least where do some of these lessons come from? Like yes, like for me, like stories have been so important. That's why I have the show in a sense to hear
Yeah.
these. But when I face that kind of moment of like reckoning when you make a mistake, and for me at the very least I realized that, oh, it's all on me, like,
Yeah.
that puts me in a completely different frame of mind. Have you ever been in a situation like that, and how do you kind of like move forward?
Um, that's a good question. I mean, um, the first thing I went to, which is I think is not quite what you're asking, is, but a bit of advice is in those moments where, like big career moments, maybe it was when you were choosing a college actually, because most of folks here probably had choices beyond Penn. There are these moments where you're like, I've got to make a big choice here, and it's there's no going back, and or at least not easily, and it can be intimidating. I found back to my first comment, I in those moments, I always want to be like, I'm smart enough. I know something secret no one else does, and I can figure out like the real answer. But it's not true. Like, in these big moments, half the time, like my decision making is terrible, because in those when you have lots of iterations with something, you can learn. But when there's these big choices or big moments, you're not going to have very many of them. So a lot of times, I just pick people. And that's sort of, I follow people, not companies, teams, not products, things like that. And early on in my career, I was finishing up the dissertation, had was at that first startup, had joined another startup, and was part-time, was interviewing, and had the option to join like real respectable companies. Like I think one was DocuSign. This is a long time ago now, and another one was NCR, which is not necessarily a consumer facing company, but quite a big conglomerate. And very tempting. These were real companies with real jobs, not these little startups with 15 or 20 people. But one of them, the people were jerks, and I remember trying so hard in the interview and trying so hard to like get an offer, because I was like, I want this name. I want to have like, I want people to respect the type of work I'm doing, all that stuff. And I was married already married at the time, and my wife would just be like, you kind of don't seem like you like these guys. And the little kind of dinky startup I was at had this boss I was working for part-time, and no one famous worked there. The product exists, but nobody knows about it. But I picked the people, right, instead of and I ended up going with this startup, and I had a fabulous time. And like I said, it was a person who's really invested in me. And I feel like you learn and grow the most in those types of situations where you're going to spend a lot of your life with these people, and you want to make sure that you feel like there's something there besides a paycheck. Even if it's a great paycheck. This startup, it wasn't a great paycheck, but sometimes there's a great paycheck, and you don't want that to cloud. You don't want that to cloud your decision making. And I think it also, a lot of times when I'm trying to, think about making these decisions, I think you mentioned like when it's all on you, I try to like think forward. I try to imagine myself like, okay, fast forward 12 months, 24 months, 10 years, and imagine looking back, you know, and what will I have want to happen? What will I want to have told people I did? And there's something about that mindset that helps de-emphasize the glory, the money, and things like that, helps you, not that it's wrong to seek those things out, but it helps put them in their perspective and helps you like think, what do I want to tell people was important to me, you know? And that sort of opens you up to be like, it's okay if I make a mistake as long as I'm making it for the right reasons. Anyway, this is a long and winding answer. But that's, I think for me, trusting in people who are invested in you and picking people you want to work with, you want to spend time with, you feel like you can work together. And then sort of imagine like, not just what do I want to accomplish? Because when I was in school, it was always like, I picture the end of the semester, picture the end of the year, and I think, what will I have accomplished? What little medals and honors and glory, which was fine, right? But as I got older, it was more like, what's the story I'm telling about myself, right? When I get through to the end of this, whatever it is, what will I want to tell people was true about myself? And, you're not going to make the right choice all the time, but if you're thinking that way, I think you're making the best choices you can. And if you make a mistake, you're making it for the right reasons. So not sure that was quite a clear answer what you're asking there, but that's kind of what came to my mind.
You answered it perfectly. I know at the beginning you're like, I don't know if this answers it, but you lied. You answered it really well. Thank you for like the disclaimer that was totally not necessary. But really, really good answer. And that part about picking people that, like you mentioned, are invested in you in a sense, or care about you to an extent, to see where your career goes, to see how you grow. It may just be that I am a horrible person, but sometimes we take those people for granted in a sense. So we don't really identify those people. How do you go about knowing who is really kind of like in your corner, and how do you really build that relationship with them?
That is a great question. There's that old saying, I think it might be from even Maya Angelou or someone, that like, when people tell you who they are, show you who they are the first time, believe them, which is a great saying, but I feel like I'm kind of dense when people tell me that, and I need it repeatedly, I think the people, for me, it's back to the screw ups. There's a theme here. You can tell I've screwed up a lot. I think it's the people who, when you feel like you've made a mistake, or you feel down about things you've done, they're the people that are there for you. They're the people, because sometimes funny thing happens where, when you're down, you feel like you've made a mistake. You always have friends or associates who are there to be like, yeah, you did. And let me tell you why you should have listened to me and why you're an idiot. We all have those friends, and, but they're not good friends in that moment. And you'll be surprised. You'll always be able to find somebody who, when you're kind of feeling that way, is going to respond with, no, it's okay. Like, we all make mistakes, and they'll respond with insight about you that you hadn't really considered. And those moments, those are the people that have ended up being the closest for me. And it is true, they often get overlooked. Sometimes the people that are the best mentors don't have that edge that a lot of times corporate cultures want. And that is unfortunate. And that's a balance, everyone has to have in their lives. But I think, so to get that moment, you have to actually have some vulnerability. And that was really, really hard for me. Still is, to be able to admit, I think I screwed up. I think someone's mad at me, or just say, hey, I don't know what's going on here. Because I actually happened yesterday. At work, I reached out to a senior vice president who I don't work with well enough to know very well. We know each other, but we don't know how the other ones of us, the other side works. And so, emailed asking him for some support on something, and emailed back. And honestly, I didn't understand the email. It was, which just sounds silly, but it happens. And I was like, I think he said no. I was getting ready to either feel sad or mad, and reached out to a friend of mine, and I was like, I'll be honest, I have no idea what this email is saying. And he walked me through it, and turned out, it was fine. It was okay. I was just reading it the wrong way. So you do have to be vulnerable. And that can be something that's very hard for students that have gotten to places like Penn and to other places, people that go into something like management consulting, where for the first couple of years, maybe it's a law, law firms might be similar. There's some of those jobs where it's very hard and it's very scary to be vulnerable. You feel a lot of intense competition. But eventually, you'll find those moments to like share, hey, I'm struggling with this, you can help with that. And the people that, again, who encourage you, but then have insights about you that you didn't really think about, those are the people to keep around. You might go in different directions. You might have really different jobs. One of you might end up reporting to the other one someday. But that's okay, because if you have that foundation of you look out for each other and you're really invested in the other one, you'll be good friends, but you'll also make you a better person at work, someone who really values investing in your colleagues and your team. And that just makes you better at work. So it is the right thing to do. It's a good thing to do, but it really genuinely makes you a better employee and a better worker.
Absolutely, like amazingly said. I think it was Aristotle who said something like find friends who bring out the best in you and teach
Yeah,
you about yourself. So like
perfect.
definitely like some really good advice. And as you said, like that whole area of vulnerability is something that personally, like I feel a lot of us struggle with, and something
Yeah.
that every day when I make a mistake, I'm just like, okay, good, I have to remind
Like
myself,
nobody
like,
saw, right? Nobody saw.
yeah. And I'm just
Yeah.
like, okay, I need to tell someone, and I have to I have to psych myself up to be vulnerable at many times. And when I started working with the team, I realized that what I do will be followed by the people who I work with. So if I don't be vulnerable, my team's not going to be vulnerable. If I
No,
don't tell the truth, they're not going to tell the truth. And like having to, number one, reflect on my own work and be a good person for my own deliverables is one thing, but having to shape a culture is something that is a little bit different. You are someone
absolutely.
who, today you're like in this really high position, you work with so many people. How do you shape that culture for them, in a sense? How do you bring these things that you've learned and like make sure that others have kind of like that same environment, that same like vulnerability and all of that?
It's a great question and great insights on your own. You're far ahead of where I was. At 19, I was still, debating on hard days whether to skip class and just go read at the bookstore when it still had books, which I think now it's just sweatshirts. But at a time, there was a time when the Penn bookstore had mostly books, which is kind of crazy to think about. Um, there's it is hard to guide the culture, and I'm still learning. And I think that sometimes it's easy when we get frustrated or we are turned off by something. It's easy to kind of rant and rave and then calm down, maybe over the weekend, and then just be like, whatever, and go back to work. And the founder of Visa is this really interesting guy named D Hawk. I think still getting quite advanced in years at this point, but still around. And he had this interesting saying that we still share internally in the company at times, where he said, when you're an employee, or someone asked him how to be a good manager, and he said, I thought of all the things that made me upset or frustrated when I was an employee, and tried to never do those. And when and tried to repeat all the things that made me happy. Um, and it sounds really basic, but there is this sense of like, once you reach a position to be like, now it's my turn, you know, and, that's probably human nature, and it probably happens to all of us. But there typically, I think we internalize too much of that frustration we feel, and we say, oh, it's the price of climbing the ladder. I need to be tougher. I need to have a thicker skin. And we bottle it up and we say, that's just the way it is. There's some truth to that. That is, it is, most of us are going to be working in for-profit businesses that are not, warm and cuddly. But most people have those frustrations, and I think you find if you're honest about them, people will open up. But more than that, I think people have a surprising amount of patience, dealing and working through tough things, as long as you're willing to acknowledge that what they're doing is tough. I think what I've seen is that when there's a leader or someone that's just like, this is just the way it is, you guys are gonna have to suck it up and move through it or work through it or manage it, whatever. People respond, people work hard, but they don't love it. And instead, if you say, look, we have certain constraints. I know I'd love to change these things. For now, we can't, or we can only change one thing at a time. Let's work together on this. people really respond. I think people understand life's complicated and that nothing's perfect. But that acknowledgement that you're not crazy, the acknowledgement that it's okay to be frustrated by things goes a long way. And that back to following people instead of companies. I remember one of the first bosses I had who would just say, "No, you're not crazy. You should be mad." And I remember feeling like, "Thank you. Thank you." And it made it so much easier to deal with because instead of like carrying it around and it's like, oh, these stupid people, you were like, no, someone gets me. And then the more you talk, the more you realize most people kind of agree that some policies are dumb and that some things are hard. So I'm not, I'm just one of many. Visa's a big company. There's a lot of us, a lot of vice presidents, a lot of senior vice presidents. But I do think that there is a movement toward speaking plainly. At Visa, and I'm sure at other companies, I think that's a generational change. It's probably taken several generations, but I think it's a good one. It's not just about showing up, getting a paycheck. Life's complicated. And you kind of need to all be in it together, working through the problems, or you're just going to get frustrated.
All right, very, very good advice, and I really appreciate this conversation. I'm going to be honest. I think that I've spent a lot of time asking my personal questions and like getting answers from my own life. So, like, audience, if you guys have questions, I'm so sorry for ignoring you. Like, you can ask them, but like if not, I'm just gonna like air out all my problems and get all my solutions. You're lost, guys. But no, very, very well like said. And especially in this climate right now of this whole pandemic, of this whole time where everyone is both very connected and extremely disconnected at the
Yeah.
same time, how do you see like yourself in a role of bringing people together in a sense, and being able to apply all of these stuff that we know, or we've kind of like built up in a physical setting for many, many years. It's things
Yeah.
that we learn through experience, and then suddenly we're all thrown into kind of like a different world, or like a parallel
Sure.
universe that we're slowly transitioning out of. How was it like managing these last few months in a way?
Uh, Another great question. Some people are sort of the natural connectors in an office place. There's various of these personality tests or quizzes, strengths finders, all that stuff. And there's usually a category for the person that's like the, the heart, the person that invests a ton of time and energy. And I am sometimes struggle with those types of connections. But there's always someone who seems to know everything that's going on with other people, like in their lives. And that person just needs to be empowered. That makes a huge difference. Now, it's usually in a team. It's not like one person for a whole company. And it can be surprising who it is. Sometimes it's, some gruff old manager like we have in our local office, a sales leader. He's been doing it for 25, 30 years. He's a former like college football player. He's like 6.5 feet tall, huge guy. And he's like the life of the office, and I think it was hard for him without being face to face, but like he's the one that keeps the text threads going. They talk about football games, he's the one that gets lunches together on the side. But he's senior, and so he's very empowered to do that. But a lot of times the person that connects the rest of the team isn't. And so my role has been like making sure those people feel empowered. So in our team, there's an executive assistant to a couple of SVPs who always knows when someone's about to have a kid or get married, or maybe there's a big health thing coming up, a surgery or something. She always knows. And it's amazing. And so my job, in my view, my job is to make sure she has the protection, the air cover, to really lean into that skill. There's another person on my team who always knows local volunteer stuff. And I don't know if it's from, just being part of the community or if she actively seeks it out, but she always knows. And so my job there is to make sure she has the time and energy to organize it. Because when you get a team together to go volunteer and do stuff like that, even if 90% of the time you're sitting in your own bedroom or office, but if you every once in a while can go do something new and different, it's really, really hard if it's a corporate policy. It's really hard. It feels fake. And usually, usually the senior most person in an organization is usually not the heart of the organization. When I was at a previous job, I was part of a marketing team. I was in product marketing, and the company was going through some hard times and had a couple of rounds of layoffs. And they laid off some folks in marketing who were on the creative side, and it was just devastating. And I remember going and talking to the head of finance and asking, like, why did you guys get rid of these folks? And they were like, these guys have outside employment, they're totally safe, they're really high-end creative assets that our company just can't sustain anymore. And they were totally flummoxed at the response. And I tried to explain it. I was like, those guys you got rid of, they were the heart. They were the ones that were deeply invested in other people, always made the office feel like something more than a job. And so I think if you're the leader of a team or an office or whatever, and you're not that hard, which is fine. Like I said, I like to think I have my own skills, but I'm not the person that just knows all that's going on in people's lives. And so my job is to empower that person and make sure they feel free to, invest their work time into that, because that's something that benefits everybody.
No, I think that's absolutely amazing, and I'm actually really digging this advice because I've always been the kind of person who I'm not like, I wouldn't say I'm not a people person, but I'm not, like, as you said, like the heart of the team at
Yeah.
times. And I feel like many times, like the advice I get is always like try harder and like work with a lot, which is important to take an effort and all. Just that
Yeah.
some people do that naturally, and I think it goes back to your earlier point where you mentioned about collaboration versus competition. So it's not to
Yeah.
kind of like compete to be like the central hub of information, but to know who your resources are in a sense and work with them in a way, which is very good advice, and definitely something that comes from experience, because I would not have figured it out unless you and without this conversation. So, no, I'm serious. I'm serious.
Well, I
Thank you.
figured it out the hard way, but still learning. And you guys, you're probably better than you think at it. It's, but we only have so much time in the day, and sometimes just recognizing that someone else is really good at that part of the office culture, and just empowering them.
Very, very nicely said. And again, today, working with all of these people, with all those experiences that you have, what do you think, like, what do you look for when you work with people? Like, on the flip side, in a sense.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think there's the as you go into a career and you start hiring regularly and you start having these experiences where you're interviewing people over and over again, you I think have these assumptions about what will really matter to you. And then you over time realize that some of those aren't accurate at all. I think that for me, something that I didn't realize was as important in California, because it's so densely populated, so many different people. When I moved to Utah for a different job, sparsely populated, not as diverse of a population, you realize just how important it is to have people that are different from you and challenge you. And it's not something, I mean, you sort of pay it lip service, I think, coming into the world, because you're like, yeah, of course we want diverse people. You don't really know what that
Diversity,
means.
yeah.
Yeah, especially my background, not being part of a minority, it's easy for me to say yes, and not really understand. But I think moving away from California, where you have such a diverse population, to a place where you really start to see it, and diversity of all kinds. And you find yourself in these meetings where you're like, I think we're all the same person. And, you're all making the same jokes and you're all making the same mistakes. And that's problematic. And so I think we paid a lot of lip service in corporate America about diversity, but you don't really recognize how critical it is until suddenly you find yourself without it. And then you realize you're just missing whole swaths of human experience. The other thing I thought, because I was like, I worked hard, I was a good student, I went to good schools, I thought that would matter to me. And it turns out it doesn't. I think for some jobs, a specific type of training, obviously. But again, that's not something that I tend to focus on as much. It does matter to a lot of hiring managers. And, if you see someone who's performed well in school, always a great indication. But in Silicon Valley, there is this sometimes a bit of an elitism. We only hire from these 10 schools. And I don't know, I think that's short-sighted. The final thing is, I think, back to kind of repeating myself, is the thing is a team. Are you a team player or not? If someone who's just amazing, but it's all about them, I don't know, just can't do it. That's probably the only, that and sort of a, being a jerk. Those are probably the only two things that would cross somebody off, because part of it's just like, do I want to live with this guy, like my work life with this person? But some of it is, you all got to be part of a team. I think that's the number one thing. If you're willing to come and support the team, great. I can work with pretty much anything else. But if you don't have that attitude, that's a hard one. That's a hard one to want to sign up to work with and mentor someone and think, okay, I'm going to work with this guy, this person for years to help teach them how to be a team member. That's a hard one to accept.
Okay. I like that answer, and I think you hit so many key points. If our audience is not taking notes, like, you can rewind this, take like put it down, put it on a post-it note, like, don't forget. In a sense, I'll rewatch it, promise. But like, hey, thank you so much for like all of these insights. I feel like you've been someone that a lot of our audience can relate to, and just from your own like truthfulness in your sharing. So like, thank you so much for like this interview. And I've got one final question. I know I'm so sad it's like the final question, but like, I'm sorry, audience, but like, if you like simply because you have been someone which I personally can relate to it throughout this interview, if you could like time travel back and meet yourself like just starting out, no, I'm serious, like just starting out, if you could send like a message in a bottle to yourself when you were just beginning and were in our position of these lost college students in a sense, what would you tell yourself?
Work less, relax more would probably be one of them. Everything's going to be okay. No, I think one thing I would say is, pick what you want to do if you assumed you would be successful. If you told yourself there's no chance I'm going to fail, absolutely no chance, then what would you do? And then I would say pursue that, probably because you're young and you've got time. But there's something there. If you say to yourself, if I knew I wouldn't fail, I would do X. That's usually a pretty good indication of something you're really passionate about and something that you're willing to put a lot of time into. The other thing I would say would be, be a better friend. I've never had a problem working hard. I've had a problem breaking away from work to invest in more relationships long term. And I wish I had. I mean, it's probably something that people as they get to middle age say. But you jump a couple of jobs, you work for a decade or more, and you start to realize, I wish I'd kept up some of those relationships. And you learn surprising things from the people, but it keeps you grounded. Having friends who've known you at different stages in your career, seen you do different things, really helps you keep perspective on life. I think I would have told myself that, like, take some chunk of all that time and energy you're putting into class and take some of that and just put it into your friends and make sure that you stay in touch with them as you get older.
All right. I like that. I like sometimes when I do these interviews, I worry if like the advice is kind of like your typical advice, but you seem to speak really from the heart, and it is, no, I'm serious. It's different from what like people just say when they're just saying things in a way. So thank you for this sharing, and thank you for this interview. And I just hope that you've had as much fun as me and the audience.
This is great. Yeah, appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah, and thank you very much. So
thank you.
Yep. And I guess this is the end of our interview. So sad. Like, if you have not been watching the whole thing, don't worry, you can rewatch it. Or if you enjoyed today's interview, rewatch it as well. Give us a subscribe, give us a like. Thank you guys for being on, like, viewing the show with us today and joining us for this amazing conversation. So to all of our audience, we're signing out for now. If you like today's show, we'll be back again next Thursday with Changing Reality at 10 p.m. ET and whatever time that is, wherever you are in the world. So thank you, and till then, bye.
You're listening to Changing Reality. Changing Reality, where we bend reality all across the world. Only on WQHS Radio.